was it like on the set of Little House on the Prairie? The actress who played Michael Landon's wife says it wasn't as wholesome as it seemed.
Little House on the Prairie was the biggest thing on TV in the 1970s.
Grove was a place where people suffered real losses, made real mistakes, and faced real consequences. That vision put him almost immediately into conflict with Ed Friendly, the co-creator who had helped bring the series to NBC in the first place. Friendly had a more traditional, book-faithful approach in mind, a warm adaptation of Laura Ingalls Wilder's beloved memoir series, respectful in tone and gentle in execution. Landon had bigger, more ambitious ideas. He wanted to push deeper, go darker, and tell stories that the original books never imagined. The friction between the two men was inevitable, and it resolved itself in the most predictable way possible when you put a force of nature like Landon in a room with someone who disagrees with him. Friendly was gradually pushed to the margins, and Landon's vision took total control of the series. This pattern, Landon's while overwhelming every competing voice, would define the show's entire run. He was charismatic, hard-working, and genuinely talented, but he was also controlling, occasionally cruel in his bluntness, and utterly uncompromising when he believed he was right. People who worked with him have described the experience in almost identical terms, difficult and inspiring in equal measure, like standing next to a fire that keeps you warm, but can also burn you if you get too close. For Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls opposite Landon's Charles for the entirety of the series, the experience was particularly complicated. On screen, their partnership was the emotional spine of the show, a marriage defined by mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and unshakable love. Off-screen, Grassel later revealed, things were considerably less harmonious. She spoke in interviews about her ongoing battle to receive fair compensation, describing how Landon resisted giving her raises that reflected her contribution to the series and her standing relative to other lead actors on comparable NBC dramas. Beyond the financial disputes, Grassel also recounted moments on set where Landon's humor crossed into territory she found demeaning, jokes at her expense that carried an edge of dismissal rather than warmth. The two eventually made peace in later years, but during the production of the show, their relationship was defined as much by tension as by professional collaboration. Not everyone shared Grassel's complicated experience, of course. For Melissa Gilbert, who joined the series as a 10-year-old girl playing Laura Ingalls and who'd spent her entire adolescence on that set, Landon was something closer to a second father. Her own adoptive father passed away while the show was in production, and Landon stepped into that emotional role with a combination of protectiveness and high standards that Gilbert has spoken about with genuine affection throughout her adult life. He held her to a demanding level of performance, but he also shielded her from the worst pressures of child stardom in an industry that was not known for treating young performers with particular care. Gilbert has said repeatedly that she owes a significant part of her emotional survival of childhood fame to Landon's presence. And then there was Alison Arngrim, the actress behind the show's most gleefully wicked character, the perpetually scheming Nellie Oleson. Arngrim's recollections of Landon are tinged with the wariness of someone who recognized his power and felt its heat. She described him as capable of being blunt to the point of intimidation when he felt a performance wasn't measuring up, and while she acknowledged that this intensity pushed the cast to do their best work, it also created an atmosphere on set that could feel relentless. Landon's set was not a place where mediocrity was tolerated, and not everyone thrived under that kind of pressure. Behind the camera, there were personal complications as well, ones that rippled through the professional relationships on set with lasting consequences. During the production of Little House, Landon began an affair with Cindy Clerico, one of the show's makeup artists. He was married at the time. The affair became an open secret among the cast and crew, and for people like Melissa Gilbert, who had come to think of Landon almost as family, it was a genuinely painful betrayal. Gilbert was close not only to Landon professionally, but to his daughter Leslie as a personal friend, which made the situation feel far more intimate than a typical workplace scandal. She held that hurt close for years, nearly a decade by her own account, refusing to reconcile with Landon even after the show ended. The moment they finally made peace came on The Tonight Show, in a surprise reunion appearance that seemed to close the chapter on the estrangement. Tragically, Landon was dead within weeks, taken by an aggressive and fast-moving pancreatic cancer at just 54 years old. The reconciliation, at least, meant that their story ended on something other than silence. Landon and Clerico did marry in 1983, and by all accounts remained genuinely devoted to each other until his death. But the collateral damage of how that relationship began left marks that some on the Little House set never fully forgot. Meanwhile, beyond the personal dramas and creative power struggles, the show itself was changing. By the early 1980s, after nearly 8 full seasons on the air, Little House on the Prairie was no longer the ratings powerhouse it had once been. Television tastes were shifting. The gritty urban dramas and glossy primetime soaps that defined the early 80s were pulling audiences in new directions, and the pioneering stories of Walnut Grove felt, to some viewers, increasingly out of step with the cultural moment. NBC, watching the numbers decline, made the decision that the series had run its course. Few television shows have ever managed to burrow so deeply into the American consciousness the way Little House on the Prairie did. For nearly a decade, from 1974 to 1983, millions of families across the country gathered around their television sets every week to follow the Ingalls family through the triumphs and heartbreaks of pioneer life on the Minnesota plains. It was the kind of show that felt like a warm fireplace on a cold night, familiar, comforting, and deeply human. Children grew up with Laura Ingalls as their fictional best friend. Parents saw in Charles and Caroline Ingalls a model of strength, sacrifice, and love. And grandparents recognized in Walnut Grove the echoes of a simpler, harder, more honest time. But here is the thing about Little House on the Prairie that most casual viewers tend to forget. Underneath all that warmth and frontier charm, this was never a soft show. It was never just a feel-good drama designed to fill an hour before bedtime. Under the iron-willed creative command of Michael Landon, Little House tackled poverty, addiction, racism, death, disability, and abuse with a directness that caught many viewers off guard. It was a show that could make you laugh in one scene and absolutely devastate you in the next. And perhaps nothing demonstrated that quality more powerfully than the way the series chose to say goodbye. Because when Little House on the Prairie finally ended, it did not go quietly. It did not fade out with a gentle sunset over the prairie, or close on a family gathered around a dinner table. Instead, it ended with dynamite. Real dynamite. The beloved town of Walnut Grove, the schoolhouse, the mercantile, the church, the homes that had served as the backdrop for nearly 10 years of television history, was blown to pieces in one of the most shocking finales ever broadcast on American network television. And the story of how that happened and why is far more layered and dramatic than most people realize. To truly understand the ending, you have to go back to the beginning, and more specifically, you have to understand the man who made the show what it was. Michael Landon was not simply an actor playing a pioneer father. He was, by every meaningful measure, the architect of Little House on the Prairie. He wrote scripts, directed episodes, produced the series, and shaped its creative identity from the very first season. His influence was so total and so absolute that to watch Little House is, in many ways, to watch a decade-long portrait of Landon's own values, obsessions, and convictions playing out on screen. Landon had come to the project off the back of Bonanza, where he had spent 14 years playing the youngest Cartwright son. He was a seasoned television professional, someone who understood the rhythms of long-form storytelling and the relationship between a show and its audience. But with Little House, he wanted to do something different. He wanted to create a drama that had genuine emotional stakes, one that treated its audience as intelligent adults even while remaining accessible to children. He was famously resistant to the sanitized, consequence-free version of family television that dominated the landscape at the time. His Walnut. Landon did not go down without a fight. He genuinely believed, according to people who worked with him at the time, that the show still had stories worth telling and an audience willing to hear them. He argued with the network, pushed back against the cancellation timeline, and lobbied for the chance to continue. NBC was unmoved. What emerged from the negotiations was a compromise that felt, at the time, like a reasonable solution. The flagship series would end after its 9th season, and a spin-off, Little House, A New Beginning, would carry on with a shifted focus, following Laura and her husband Almanzo as the new center of the story. The original Charles and Caroline Ingalls would recede from the frame. Without Landon's driving creative energy at the center of the production, A New Beginning struggled almost from its first episode. It lasted a single season before NBC quietly pulled the plug on it too. The experiment confirmed what the cast and the audience had perhaps already suspected. That Little House on the Prairie, whatever its flaws and conflicts, had always been fundamentally Michael Landon's creation, and without him, the heart of it was missing. But before the spin-off came and went, there was still the matter of saying goodbye to the original show. And it was here that Landon made the decision that would permanently cement his legend and shock an entire nation of television viewers. The farewell came in the form of a television movie, Little House, The Last Farewell, which aired in February of 1984. The story it told was, in outline, a fairly conventional piece of dramatic plotting. A land baron arrives in Walnut Grove with legal documentation establishing his ownership of the town and its surroundings. The residents, facing the prospect of losing everything they have built, find themselves backed into a corner with no legal recourse and no easy escape. What they have, however, is agency, and in the film's climactic sequence, the people of Walnut Grove make the decision that if they cannot keep their homes, then no one will take them either. Family by family, they set charges. And one by one, the buildings of Walnut Grove, the schoolhouse where Laura Ingalls first found her voice, the mercantile where Nels Olson dispensed everything from fabric to frontier wisdom, the church where the community had gathered in both grief and gratitude, are reduced to rubble and dust. For the audience watching at home, the effect was profound and deeply unsettling. This was not a fictional town being destroyed in some abstract narrative sense. These were sets that had been standing for a decade, physical spaces that viewers had come to associate with genuine emotional memories. The destruction felt real because, as audiences would later learn, it was real. Landon had ordered the actual set demolished with actual dynamite. There was no camera trickery, no elaborate visual deception. The buildings went up, and they came down, and they were gone. Cast members who were present for the filming have described the experience in terms that go well beyond the professional. Melissa Gilbert has spoken of it as a kind of funeral, a long and painful goodbye to a place and a period of her life that had shaped her more profoundly than almost anything else. The grief she felt watching those structures collapse was not performed for the camera. It was genuine. So why did Landon do it? Why take the dramatic step of actually destroying the set, rather than simply writing a final episode and walking away? The answer, as best as it can be reconstructed from interviews and accounts from people who knew him, comes down to a combination of creative integrity and genuine anger. Landon's relationship with NBC had soured considerably by the time the series ended. He felt that the network had never fully understood or appreciated what Little House on the Prairie was trying to do, that the executives who made decisions about its future were measuring it by metrics that missed its real value. And as the show was being wound down, he became increasingly concerned about what would happen to the physical artifacts of its production once the cameras stopped rolling. The Walnut Grove set, built on the Paramount Ranch in Agora Hills, California, was studio property. Once Little House finished its run, there was nothing to stop NBC or Paramount from repurposing that space, renting out the buildings as backgrounds for other productions, letting them decay gradually into disuse, or simply dismantling them without ceremony. To Landon, that prospect was unacceptable. He had spent a decade building something, and he was not going to allow it to be casually absorbed into someone else's story or left to rot. The destruction of Walnut Grove was, in his framing, an act of preservation through negation, a way of ensuring that the place belonged permanently and exclusively to the story it had been built to tell. If it couldn't be Little House, it would be nothing. The dynamite was not vandalism. It was a period at the end of a sentence. The reception to the last farewell was, to put it charitably, mixed. Some viewers recognized immediately what Landon was doing and responded to the emotional logic of it. The destruction of Walnut Grove felt, to these audiences, like an appropriate punctuation for a show that had always preferred difficult truths over comfortable illusions. If the show was going to end, let it end with the same fearlessness it had brought to every season that preceded it. Others were simply upset. They had tuned in expecting a warm send-off, a final gathering of familiar faces, a sunset ride over the prairie, and instead they got explosions and ruins. For viewers who had grown up with the Ingalls family as a kind of surrogate household, a stable, loving presence in their living rooms for nearly 10 years, watching Walnut Grove destroyed felt less like a bold, creative statement and more like a betrayal. They wrote letters to NBC. They called it excessive. They called it gratuitous. Some called it traumatic. And then, over the years, something interesting happened. The finale receded from regular syndication. Networks preferred to air the lighter, more family-friendly episodes from the earlier seasons, the ones that fit the show's wholesome reputation and wouldn't disturb younger viewers or catch any parent off guard. The darker, more challenging episodes, and especially the last farewell, were screened less and less frequently. And as decades passed, the absence of the finale from the regular rotation fed a persistent myth that the episode had been pulled from broadcast, that it had been too shocking for television, that it had somehow gotten the show into trouble. None of that was true, of course. Little House on the Prairie ended because of declining ratings and a network that had moved on. The finale aired and was even rebroadcast a handful of times in the years immediately following its debut. But myths are often more compelling than facts, and the idea that one episode had been so explosive, literally and figuratively, that it had taken the whole show off the air proved to be a story that people wanted to believe. What the finale really did was cement something more lasting than ratings, or